Welcome, everyone. Glad to see you all here. Appreciate you spending your time with us this afternoon. We'll try to make it as informative as possible and answer your questions afterwards. There will be a survey coming out this next week and on next Sunday also. They'll be online and also in person next Sunday. We want to know more about what you all think about our ministry and our congregation and our hot thoughts and what you experience. So please look for that. My name is Leslie Polk-Cosba. I'm your moderator of the board, and many of our board members are sitting right here in front. Board members? They've been working long and hard and busy working to shore up the church budget, and you heard the announcement this morning. I hope you all heed that about matching challenge of pledges, and Roger and Alison will talk more about that. Preparing proposals for the congregation's bylaw changes that will be explained here today, and reviewing our policies. First, Unitarian is a haven for social justice, for spiritual seekers, for, read my own writing, musicians, and our whole community. So let us begin by joining in reading a portion of our church goals and how we treat each other. We'll read these in unison, so you'll have them all there, and I hope you can see them. In accordance with our Unitarian Universalist values and intentions, I promise to listen to understand rather than judge or prove a point, express appreciation of others' efforts, talk with rather than about others, be mindful and considerate in my communications and interactions, respond to anger with gentleness. Thank you all. Alison?
So Roger and I are going to be doing this section, and I'm going to share a congregational life update, and then he's going to share an annual fund drive update, and then I'm going to share some of the draft priorities that will be guiding our budget. Really, we're calling it 25-26 resource priorities because they don't just guide our budget, they actually guide how we allocate staff and volunteer time as well. So that is an important distinction. But let me begin with a short congregational life update. Last time I spoke with you was on October 27th, and we do have some highlights that I wanted to be sure that we made time for, even though I think the policies are, we really wanted to have ample time for the policies which follow Roger and I today. First, I want to lift up the highlight of the 100th anniversary celebrations of Elliott Chapel, including the rededication ceremony here in November and the involvement of people of all ages in that. Prior to that, we had the architecture panel, and really the rousing success of the 100th anniversary Christmas pageant as a part of those festivities on December 22nd. And I wanted to share that on that day, we hit our highest number in one service, since I've been here at least, of 515 came out for that celebration. And, you can clap for that, but before you do, on Christmas Eve, we hit well into the 600s between the two services. So though it's really, people came out and were so excited to celebrate the 100th, to celebrate the holidays, and to show up here, and there were so many volunteers dedicated to that work, and it gives me a chance to also lift up the folks, the volunteers who work in our archives. Leslie Polk-Cosba is not only our moderator this year, she's one of our main archivists, and actually Sam Muller I might have mentioned this last time, through an Easter Seals program, has started working in the church up to 20 hours a week, kind of an outside staff person, but working on the inside, no less a part of our team. And he has been working, is orienting towards archive work. And it is so exciting to bring out those stories from the past and to be able to tell them places of reckoning and places where we want to remember and feel inspired by our past as well. Another thing I wanted to lift up is we've now hit the anniversary of the Shower Project, which is incredible. And that has been a labor of love that has taken the time of Dana Buell and Kelly, our Shower Project coordinator, and Danielle Garrett, our assistant minister, and so many volunteers. And it has been, people are really coming out and want to volunteer for the Shower Project. And we're now opening a second day, so we're offering showers on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and it's been an opportunity for us to be proximate. Let me just double check. Okay. Just checking. People online are having trouble getting in, or are they getting in? Okay, good. Okay. I could feel my watch. And it's an incredible opportunity and gift to the community in terms of giving and making a difference. And when we give, we receive. Again, we're learning much more, being proximate to our houseless neighbors and understanding more about what it is that they're facing, and better positioning ourselves to be advocates for one of the most important issues really in our city and our country. The other thing I wanted to lift up is one of our goals this year has been really thinking about how we worship as a multi-generational community. And there are a couple of highlights I wanted to mention from the end of the year. One, the choir sang on that at the Christmas pageant, and that's the first time the adult music program has supported the learning community in that very big ministry. And it was so wonderful to feel multi-generational efforts going on that day. And I'm gonna have to take this off. It's just, I know I'm not the only one on it, so I trust that those of you out there are taking care of that conversation. And just last week, we had an example of a multi-generational service, and I hope you witnessed the activity of the Sprouts outside of the room. And some people testified how much this new and emerging music ministry of us singing together monthly songs of resistance and resilience was a really moving experience. We're opening our music ministry to really develop not only the music staff, but the music lay leaders. And so Rich Scher and Gilda Lawrenson are helping to lead that. And we had 8-year-olds and 8-year-olds singing with gusto side by side downstairs. And we're going to continue to try to enhance our multi-generational worship opportunities. And the number one thing that encourages our youth to remain, we're open-minded if our children or youth grow up and decide that another faith tradition better fits their alignment. We certainly celebrate that they were with us and celebrate their journey of change, but we also need to do a better job of inviting. And it turns out that the number one predictor as to whether or not young adults will return is if they've had meaningful experiences in the sanctuary, and if they feel known, and if they feel like they know the ministers. And so that is such an important ministry. So thank you for all of you who will be helping us and who have helped us to shape meaningful worshiping experiences, as well as learning experiences that are multi-generational. One of the things we're offering this year is the Labyrinth as a spiritual journey, a metaphor for the changes that we seek and the changes that we have happening in our lives. And again, we've had children and adults going through together. So spending more time feeling the different ages of our community. And here's a tip. Some folks who maybe are only on the first floor in the sanctuary may not realize it, but behind you are often where the parents and the children and sometimes the young adults sit. So depending upon where you are in the sanctuary, you also have a different sense of the breadth of ages that we hold. We wanted to mention how much community building has gone on in the congregation, not only the new visitor circles that are happening immediately following the service has been a way to actually invite visitors into a deeper experience right away, and that has already, we've had feedback that that's made a huge difference in terms of how friendly and welcoming we feel. We have had pancake breakfasts on the first Sunday. We have had Super Sundays on the second Sunday of the month. And last week, everyone enjoyed the walking taco so much, they said, let's do it every third Sunday. I will say, without even having to get all the way to staff meeting on Tuesday, I told people, and I tell you now, we're not quite ready to add a monthly third food Sunday. But we are thinking about, since we'll be singing on that Sunday, is there something simple we might be able to offer, like cookies? And we really want to develop a hospitality crew so that staff and volunteers are working together to keep our building clean, because you know what they say about church mice? They're the only ones not welcome here. And sometimes they're larger mice. We won't talk about that. So it has been, and we even were able to one Sunday have Kamal's Family Restaurant provide food, and today is the last day to order tamales for a Sunday coming up. I want to highlight social justice. Not only have we engaged in the shower project, but You the Vote has been a highlight in this past fall and later. Even we will continue doing the work and are now beginning to work with Pink Haven in terms of how it is that we support especially trans and non-binary folks and immigrants. But really a highlight was mailing 13,000 letters in the fall, and those who went to Arizona to convince people to vote in line with our values. We don't tell people who to vote for, but we do raise consciousness about issues such as access to reproductive care and gender-affirming care. Another wonderful, we want to grow older and younger in the congregation. So coming up, we have a class for Articulating Your Faith that Danielle and I are going to be leading for young adults. And we just launched a brand new seniors ministry. And they're imagining all kinds of, here's a question I want to ask you. What are the barriers that seniors might have to engagement and participation in our congregation? And one thing I know is Mark Barham and Ruth Llewellyn-Dixon, I have a meeting coming up to reflect on rides and how people get from one location to another, especially on Sunday mornings. And I see some heads nodding. So what are the barriers? What are the opportunities for folks to engage? I want to lift up just Garrett Bond, our acting music director. He has done a fabulous, yeah, feel people clapping. He has done a fabulous job. Today was a wonderful, one of the things Garrett asked me was, could we weave into the rotation a chance to spotlight something different on perhaps a monthly basis? We'll figure out what the ultimate rotation might look like. But today was an example. We have a member with Henriette with an incredible voice, a professional singer, opera singer, and who comes to us from South Africa. So what a wonderful way to hear music that was cross-cultural this morning when we were focused on that theme. And so pay attention to different opportunities that may arrive in music. And honestly, both the community choir and the audition choir are both sounding fantastic. Fantastic. It is a gift to hear your voices on Sunday morning. I want to lift up Michael Two Feathers, who served on our staff second longest to Tom, who's about to hit 30 years. Michael Two Feathers just retired, and he was someone who had the capacity to fix many things. So anytime something wood broke, often Michael Two Feathers would be called into action, and so many other different things. I look at bookcases, I look at different places, and I think, wow, this incredible gift has been a part of our community for so long, and now we'll have to figure out, if there's a carpenter out here, please talk to Jason. We definitely want to know that. And we celebrate that Ashley got a new job with the Y in line with her vision of being involved in camps and leadership in care of our young people. And she's still with us some on Sunday mornings, including today, minding what's going on next door in Buchanan Reception. The Personnel Committee has been meeting for a year now, and there is a draft of a brand new personnel handbook that is really moving into the final stages. So that is very exciting. And we want to be sure that our values and policies are in alignment and that we are following them. And so it is such a gift that committee has offered for us. And I'm just trying to think. The other thing is we're about to start meeting towards the strategic planning and visioning coming up in the year ahead. And the UUA will be coming in likely in March to offer a healthy boundaries workshop as part of the learning around change and conflict that we need to do. And that's perfect, because that was I don't know if that was on purpose, but that was the last highlight I have here on this page. So with that, I will turn it over to Roger to talk about an AFD update. And we're all here to answer more questions at the end. But Roger.
Thank you, Allison. Next slide, please. Annual fund updrive. Annual fund update. Let's see here. Hang on. I'll just read it. The good news is we have received $1,274,000 on the pledge, which is 91% of the $1.4 million goal. And we want to thank everybody who's already pledged. It's great to see this much support for our church. The other great news, as you know if you attended services this morning and saw me in a green wig, some people said I looked cute. I'll give you the $5 later, Gilda. I want to thank everybody who's donated and is considering donating to the match. And I want to thank those who have put up the money for the match. It's wonderful. Am I next or are you next?
I have 7 draft priorities to share with the congregation. So, here we go. So these are our draft priorities. I will also be sending it out in an upcoming column, so you'll be able to reflect on it there too. These are our 26 priorities. Remember that just one thing to be conscious of is that our, what I was about to say is our annual budget drive and our congregational year are slightly shifted, right? So when we're raising right now for our 24-25 priorities, immediately, if we have a $120,000 shortfall, we would feel $60,000 of it right now this spring. And then the other $60,000 we would feel at the beginning of the next programmatic year, 25-26, and these are some of the priorities. Some of them are carryover priorities from last year, this year, the one we're in, and some have been shifted somewhat. We wove the learnings from the community conversations into our priorities for this year, and in the fall, we had listening circles, which were especially an invitation around folks that were concerned around the music ministry transition. And so it didn't have as many people as we had in the community conversations, but we learned some things. And so some of that is woven into these draft priorities. And so you may notice a shift. It's because when you share information with us, we always take it seriously and listen and reflect on what might that mean about how we shift where we're moving next. So let me begin with one of the priorities is equipping leaders. And that is not only moving into the wider strategic planning process, mission, vision, covenant, and a 5-year plan, but in addition, and this is how it has shifted, it's about equipping our leaders, all of the leaders in so many parts of the congregation, about how to manage change and navigate conflict in healthy ways. And so that is another part of equipping leaders. Another thing is we had the 8th principle appear in our welcoming work in the priorities for this year, but in the draft priorities for 25-26, we have a priority engaging our 8th principle within and beyond our walls. So not only reflecting and beyond the hospitality ministry on different parts of our congregation and to recognize where there are obstacles and opportunities for folks that find themselves on the margins of various programs or experiences here. What is it that we need to change to be more in alignment with our goals of anti-oppression and anti-racism in particular? And also allowing it, and this is happening in some places, but again, to guide our justice work in the community beyond our walls and our justice work inside our walls. And then some of the priorities continue. Spiritual growth, continuing to work on becoming a multi-generational music making and worshiping community, and supporting greater community building amongst those folks coming online. So spiritual growth, not only for those of us that are in person, but for those online. And you heard this morning about the Reflect and Connect program that will be every Tuesday evening on Zoom as a way to have that worship experience move to the middle of the week for everyone, but the folks online don't get to come to coffee hour or or to walk the labyrinth with us following the service. Continuing to work on lifelong learning, expanding our adult program opportunities, and evaluating our offerings for children, youth, and families, that will continue. Increasing the resources that we have to fulfill our mission, definitely in terms of treasure, but also leadership development and gifts discernment around opportunities for volunteering here in the congregation, and to really help people see the connection between what they give and do. And continuing and a slight shift is our partnerships beyond the community, but it's really important, I think. We had turned inward so much during the pandemic. We have a shifting focus, explicit, that is already burbling, really turning outward to our interfaith and justice partners, really turning outward to other congregations, really imagining, people speak very highly of the service that happened at Pioneer Square, maybe doing something like that again, maybe an animal blessing in every part of the city. These are the kinds of things. We're a regional church. What would it look like like to really feel the presence in different neighborhoods, partnerships and turning outward, and then a continuing priority of growing our membership and friendship, which includes addressing and enhancing our communications, including online, and continuing to focus on the newcomer experience, and developing opportunities for people to move from being a visitor to a friend, from a friend to a member, and also reaching out to folks beyond the annual fund drive to figure out how they're doing, to tend that relationship, and to invite people back who've been away, and to just check in and see how they're doing. So continuing to grow membership and friendship. So those are the 7 draft 25-26 priorities, which we will be sending you in an upcoming column. And we really welcome your thought and influence. The staff have already influenced these and will continue to influence what I shared today. So thank you.
Now the moment you all been waiting for. How we do the budget. Step number, whoa. There I go again. Okay, sorry people. Thought I had this in order. It's more orderly than that, I swear. Okay, here we are. Budgeting at First Unitarian is led by the executive team with input from the board and congregants. Step 1 is our policies direct the executive team to present a draft budget to the board's finance committee at their February meeting, which will be coming up soon. In presenting the budget, the ET also will explain the approach as to why they made the decisions about the budget. This budget may typically not be balanced yet because there's work to be done. So, okay. Next slide, please. Step 2, the Finance Committee and the Executive Team review the draft budget in detail at this February meeting, and the Executive Team takes the budget back for revisions as needed. The Treasurer also schedules an informal informational meeting on the budget for congregants in March, which is what I will do, to receive congregant input on the budget and relay this feedback back to the Executive Team. Step number 3, the Executive Team presents its final balanced annual budget proposal to the Finance Committee in March. Following this is another informational congregant meeting in March. Next slide, please. Next paper. Too many pieces. Here we are. Step 4, the Finance Committee presents the recommended budget to the board for review and approval at the board's April meeting. The board has an informational session in May for congregants on the budget and other items being voted on in the May election. Information on this meeting will be in the front steps. In May, as part of the mail-in voting for new officers of the church, the congregation also votes on the approval of the budget and other matters. Next slide, please. This is a pie chart, and it shows our revenues. I don't know how many of you can read the words. You okay reading the words? Do I need to read the words to you? But as you can see, the largest amount is our pledges. 71% of our income comes from our pledges. The second largest is our rental to Northwest Academy. You can see that at 18%. And then we go on down. Next slide, please. This is how we spend our money. Can you read this? Wow. Some people, wow, it's amazing. All right, I can't read that either. Is payroll, of course. That makes up 71% of our expenses. And then it goes on down. The next highest is 6%, and we go into a lot of 2s and 1s. And then we're going to start that process, as I mentioned, soon with the next Finance Committee meeting in February. Thank you.
We're holding questions until the end. So after Roger and I come the board policies updates.
Whoa. Well, that was exciting. Everybody okay? All right. My name is Julia Lee Griffiths. I'm a member of the board, and I'm the chair of the Communications Committee, and we were not communicating, so here I am. So the next part of our forum today is going to talk about, just introduce 2 ideas that are going to be bylaws changes proposed this spring. How many? 2. We're going to have 2 brief presentations for you today to kind of introduce these ideas. The first one is going to be Mindy, talking about a change in the board size. The second one is going to be John, talking about a change based on the mailing list request we had earlier this year. Okay, so how many bylaws changes? Who's going first? Mindy. Got it.
Okay, I will do my best because I don't have a very strong voice. So can we have the first slide for the board, which is what are the roles of the board? Okay, so my name is Mindy Clark. For those of you who don't know me, I just finished in June a 6-year term of service on the board. And one of the things that I worked on while I was there was researching and thinking about the size of our board. And so I'm really pleased that after 6 years, I'm finally here to talk to you about it. I am nothing if not persistent. So first of all, let's talk about what the roles of the board are. So the 3 key roles of the board are obviously fiduciaries. Right? This is what you were hearing here earlier this morning. How's our budget working? What's our property look like? How are we taking care of the assets that we have? It's also then strategic to think about what are the church's priorities, and are we using our money? Are we using all of our resources? Are we using our time, our talent, and our treasure to further those goals and things that we think are important? And then the last thing is what's called generative, and that's the part where we really think on beyond where we are right now and what we're engaged in doing right now as a church. So one of the wisest people, I think, in this congregation is Cindy Comfer. And when I first started on the board, she said to me, you have to realize that you're going to be here for 3 years or 6 years, but this church has been here for more than 150 years, and hopefully it's going to be here for another 150 years after you're gone. And so your role as a board member is not only to think about how is the church doing right now and how's the church doing in the next 2 or 3 years, but how's the church? Are you doing a good job of keeping this church as an institution healthy and whole for the people who will come after you and the children who will come after the children you, because I work in RE, the children who will be here after the children you're working with in RE. And so that's, I think, a very important part of what a board does that we sometimes don't think about, that it isn't only us here now today that the board thinks about, but it's people that we will never know. So now a little bit of the nitty-gritty to talk about what happens, and this is functionally run church boards, so do not try to translate this into the nonprofit world if that's where you've got experience. So in the world of churches, and particularly in Unitarian Universalism, we have small churches, medium churches, and large churches. And what kind of church are we? Large. All right. So in small churches, there's not professional staff typically. The minister may be a contract minister and work part-time. And so the board and the congregation really are engaged in the day-to-day management and running of the church. So you find board meetings where they are actually voting on what color carpet to get, and I've heard stories about that at this church, what kind of fabric to put on the chairs in Channing, but that was a long time ago. And so as churches grow, the need for people who are more focused on the church all the time in terms of being staff becomes more important. And in those medium-sized churches, you usually have a full-time minister and you have other staff, perhaps a director of religious education. So the board's role begins to be a little bit more removed from those day-to-day management kinds of things. And then when you get to a church that's the size of our church, we have what's considered to be a professional staff. So we have a senior minister, we have an associate minister, we have sextons whose job it is to help us take care of our property. We have a whole range of people who work in different areas of the church and support the life and the work of the church. And so that's no longer the board's day-to-day responsibility, and the board then has the option or the privilege really to step back and spend more time on that strategic and generative work. We never ever give up our responsibility. Thank you. Our responsibility for maintaining the fiduciary responsibility for watching out for what's going on in the church in terms of its health, fiscal health, and what have you. So we can go to our next slide. Okay. So as a church begins to grow, so usually, to back up just a little bit, if you have a lot of tasks that need to be done, you typically have a larger board because you need more people to be doing a lot of those day-to-day things that eventually become the responsibility of staff as the church grows. And so there's two critical considerations when you look at the size of a board, and this comes out of work that's been done by a number of people. The woman that we worked specifically is a woman named Susan Beaumont, and she is a large church consultant, and she works with large churches across denominations. She was also the consultant who helped us form our ministerial search committee. And so the things that she talked to us about are primarily, one of the things you have to look at, and this fascinated me, is every time you add a person to a conversation, the complexity and the number of lines of communication grow. And so if you have two people, you have one line of communication. If you have three people, how many lines of communication do you have? 4, right? So you have the two people, you have all those people together, and then you have the group of 3. But what happens when you have 5 or more people is that the lines of communications actually explode. And so it's difficult for everyone to be in conversation with one another in a meaningful way the larger the group gets where you have to do decision making. There's always the likelihood of in a large group of someone's voice not being heard if it's a quieter person, and things like that. And so the board actually has experimented over the last couple of years with different forms of running its meeting to try specifically to engage more voices in the conversation. And so that communication process is really important. And if the communication process is not functioning efficiently, then the accuracy and the quality of decision making begins to fall off as well. Next slide. Okay. So there's actually people who do research into this, and what they have found is that as the congregation grows and the board changes its focus in its work, it's really more effective and efficient to have a smaller group that can have deeper, more complex discussions. And generally that recommendation is for a congregation our size, anywhere from 7 to 9 members. We have 12. We'll talk about where we are right now, but we have 12 right now. So when I first began this process almost 6 years ago, I did some research across Unitarian Universalist congregations, large churches 500 and over, and at that time, only about a quarter of the boards had boards of in the 7 to 9 range, and most of them were like us. They were much larger boards. And then I redid that research about 3 months ago And now about 75% of the churches in that group have moved to smaller boards. And so what we're proposing is actually in line with what's being done in other UU congregations. And I also spoke with a couple of different congregations when I was doing this research about the switch from larger to smaller to find out what worked for them, what didn't work for them, and they suggested some tools and things that we can use to help make that a good transition and to ensure that that communication among board members stays really strong. Next slide. Okay. So this is just a little quick summary of us. We're 12 members right now. We work on these primary areas. You heard about it. You heard particularly about what Reverend Allison was saying, is we're getting ready to think about our strategic planning process again. The board's very involved with that in conjunction with the ET and the staff. We are always looking at how do are we addressing our mission and our vision and our goals. And then a really important one is evaluating the effectiveness of the church ministry. And I wanted to find this for you because this is not an evaluation of the effectiveness of the ministers. It is a look at how are we all as a congregation and the ministries in which we participate, how healthy are they? How are they working? And so it's really an evaluation of the whole church and what's going on in the whole church. And so, as you would expect, the board is always looking for ways that it could do its work better. That's kind of an ongoing process. Next slide. So this is our leadership structure. Right now we have, and these are all things that are called for in our bylaws. So there are things that may be amended if we vote to change the bylaws. We have our moderator, and then we have 2 vice moderators who are really there to serve running the board meetings if the moderator isn't available. That's the only thing that's spelled out for them in the bylaws. And then a secretary and a treasurer. We have 3 standing committees. We have governance, finance, and communications. And then the board also, in the last couple of years, has been working with a model where there are some committees of congregants that are working on areas underneath one of the board committees. And so underneath the governance committee right now, there's a right relations task force that is doing some work and some research and thinking for us about right relations. Several years ago, immediately prior to the pandemic, we had a real estate development task force that was developed under finance, and they took a very comprehensive look at our whole property and all of our needs and made some suggestions, which unfortunately became moot because the pandemic hit about 3 months after they presented their report. But that's the kind of thing that they do. So let's go under, our next slide. So I want to address some of the very common concerns, the things that people are immediately thinking about when they think about having a smaller board. And one of them is that the board's going to have the same amount of work. And board members will worry about this too. We're going to have the same amount of work, but there are going to be fewer of us to do that work. And the creative solution is, well, what about involving congregants in that work? And that's actually already happening. So the Finance Committee has for years had non-board congregant members, and they've been instrumental in some very critical work that the Finance Committee has done over the years. So it was a committee of congregants who looked at our auditing processes, who have done a number of different things for us. And now this year, for the first time, we have people, we have at least 2 people that I can think of who are on the communications committee that are not board members, and I think there are 3 of us who are on the governance committee who are not board members. And so that opens up a lot of opportunity for congregants to actually get much more involved in what the board is doing and to help guide where the board is going in its thinking. And the last one is this one that we hear a lot of times, well, you have to have somebody to represent everybody. And again, the research has shown that that's actually not a very effective thing to do, because when you come on the board, as I said earlier, you're responsible for the whole church, and you're responsible for the health of the whole church and for how all the different parts work together. And so, and if you think about how many different committees and groups and whatnot we have at this church, if we were going to be truly representative, My guess is we'd be having a board of about 20 to 22 people, and that's a very ineffective size. I've been on one of those boards. And so, so the representation is, it makes it the responsibility of every board member to be sure that they're in touch with various constituencies across the church. You can't just be there, you know, like I came out of RE, so my job was not just to be there with, here's what's going on in RE. My job was also to go find out what's happening in social justice and what's happening in other places, okay? So those are kind of the background, and then this is just the kind of summary, the rationale. Why are we doing this? We want fewer lines of communication and more effective communication, the smaller, more representative board, the addition of congregants to board committees, the addition of congregant input into what the board is doing in a much earlier stage of its work. And then lastly, the practice of 7 to 9 is the best practice for churches of our size. None of us could imagine the work being done by 7 people, so we arrived at the number 9, and that's the proposal. If you switch to the last one, here we go. So a bylaw change to reduce the number of elected trustees from 12 to 9, and then these are some of the benefits that we talked about in this conversation. Now, I think that the board is going to be having some other sessions where there'll be more opportunities. We're obviously going to take questions at the end of this whole session, but I think there'll be opportunities for people to actually be in cafe conversations to talk with one another and share their thoughts and ideas. And I'll just say that when I first introduced this idea 6 years ago, everybody looked at me and said, no, that will never work. And it's been interesting to see over time that when the board finally came to vote on this at the end of last year, that I think it was a unanimous vote that we should move to this. And so we had time to talk about it and think about it, and that's what we want to have for people in the congregation too, to ask questions, to get all their questions answered, and feel comfortable that this is going to work for our church. Thank you.
I'm John Bishop, and I am either the first or the second vice moderator. I'm not sure which. I'm the first, I guess. And I serve as the chair of the governance committee. And if we can go to the next slide to continue on what Mindy was just speaking of, this is a suggested look at what would happen when we amend the bylaws to address the board size issue, suggested only because it has to be approved by the board before it's then presented to the congregation to be approved at the annual meeting. So, but I think you can see it's a relatively straightforward change. The governing body is composed of 12, instead of 12, 9. And then there is a process by which every year 4 members currently are proposed for election at each election period. It would be, since that was 1/3 of the membership proposed, we would do 3. So fairly simple language change that would be presented to the congregation for voting. And then if you could go to the next slide. Another thought, which hasn't yet been distilled down to a final decision by the board to propose as a change, was, since I'm either the first or the second moderator, the thought was there might be too many officers in a group of 9, which is currently this many: moderator, first, second, secretary, treasurer, that we're then left with 4 people who are not in the officers group, that we might reduce one of the officer positions. Something that has to be decided by the board, but that's essentially the language change that would happen in the bylaws that would be proposed for the membership, to the congregation to vote on. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll go to the next issue. The other proposed bylaw that change we're working on for the annual meeting relates to the membership list. And membership privacy. And some of you may be aware of this. If you aren't, In the fall of 2024, there was a request made to inspect and copy the membership list by members. This, you may be surprised to learn, is a state law requirement that's made available to people, that they can, in a nonprofit, which we are a nonprofit corporation, a member can come in and say, I want to see the membership list, copy and inspect it, including the contact information, which is something we as a corporation have to maintain. When that request was made and became known, the board received many requests from many members to say, I don't want my personal information revealed. That's private. I refuse. I don't consent to that. But as I say, Oregon law requires the congregation, the church, to make that available if requested. That original request that was made in the fall hasn't been pursued further to this point, but in response to the members' requests that we keep that information private, the board considered making a bylaws amendment. And if we could go to the next slide, just to get into the nitty-gritty details of this, the law does, as I said, require a corporation like us, if a request is made, we have to maintain records like our membership list and all of the contact information, and then make it available to a member. But the law also says specifically that the articles under Section 5 of the legislation that provides for that requirement, the articles of incorporation or bylaws of a religious corporation may limit or abolish the right of a member under this section to inspect and copy any corporate record. So the Oregon law, while saying that's a requirement, makes a specific allowance for religious organizations to prohibit that. And many members who were complaining about this privacy invasion pointed that out. I happen to be a lawyer and I read statutes, and I said, yeah, that's right. So if we can go to the next slide. Again, a suggested bylaw change, which has to be something considered by the board and approved, but would be a matter of adding language. The current view would be under the membership provision that says how you become a member, a sentence that essentially expresses the wishes of the congregation membership, that they want to protect their private information, and pursuant to the law, they want to make it not permissible for a member to inspect and copy the private contact information of members. So that was something that will, again, I presume, have in cafe conversations along with the board size change amendment, this amendment, and how we would consider this for the annual meeting as a proposed bylaw change. So that was that'll be the second bylaw change proposal that'll be made for the annual meeting.
Okay, so here I am communicating. That is the end of the prepared section, and so now we're going to do a Q&A thing. Is that why your hand's up, Han? Okay, so we had one or two board members offer to run microphones around, and so here you go, and there are microphones there. I believe that the microphones are muted and may need to be unmuted, and I'm going to stand here until we hand off to somebody else who's going to answer a question. And I'm keeping an eye on, yeah, you want to get to Ann? I'm going to keep an eye on the online questions. Okay. Ann, what you got?
It's a question on the last slide. On the last slide. Yep. So, as I understood this, talking before this meeting, it meant the mailing list. So for instance, if I requested the mailing list to use, it would not be available to me. But if I called the office and said, can I get Julia's phone number, or can I get her address, I want to send her a sympathy card, it would be available. Is that true?
I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you, John.
I think normal communications between the church and members is still freely given. It's just someone can't come in and say, I want the entire records that you maintain by law, the membership records, to inspect, copy, and use. So I would consider that appropriate.
Oh. Hang on, I think Catherine's got some input about that.
I just wanted to clarify before Lena, if I can do that. So to the question about if somebody calls the office and says, oh, I want to do this and be in touch with that, we actually will sometimes, if we just don't quite know, like, should this person really be just handed out some information? So we'll often just say, how about if I pass a message on to that congregant for you? So that we do our best to maintain confidentiality, unless it's like clearly somebody had a death in the family, and we know it's fine to be sending out sympathy cards, but just to let you know that we do handle it on a one-on-one type of basis.
Okay, Ingrid.
I had a question about the current board size. It is my understanding that through several board members leaving, the board is actually at 9 people right now. And I'm not exactly sure when that happened, but I would like to know what your experience, what the board members' experience is with this smaller board. Mm-hmm. And that should help guide us to what it will be if it goes through.
Okay. I'll answer that, and then John can answer that. My experience with this, and this is my 3rd year on the board, is that people have more time to speak during the meetings with the fewer people being there, and that's been the biggest change that I've noticed.
I would echo that, and I was also going to say that the governance committee, in considering that circumstance coming up, thought that it would be appropriate, because it was within the board's option to decide what to do about those vacancies, that it would be a good time to try out what it would be like to have 9 members. And as Julia said, I think that's been our experience, that it makes for meetings where more can be addressed more efficiently.
Yes.
I have a question about the budget. I saw that the tenant rental income was a pretty significant part of the budget. Any sense of the long-term plans of Northwest Academy?
Catherine and I have been meeting with the leadership at Northwest Academy, including the interim principal and the chief administrative type person. And we're discussing putting together a much longer term lease with incremental increases. And when I say longer term, our conversations have been, could we see our way towards a 5-year, I'm now checking with Catherine, I think 5-year is what we were talking about. So Northwest Academy, and it's also been a chance, this is a longer conversation, but I want to say this much, a chance to really share with one another. Our sextons do a lot of work for the school, so when there aren't increases in rent over time, that impacts us. And so just to share on both sides, how if we sign a 5-year lease, how can we have this work even better together? And there is a desire for a longer term horizon on both sides, as long as those incremental increases are included.
I have a question about the communication aspect, and I'm thinking more along in the technology side, since that is something I take a great interest in. Did any of the other large congregations have suggestions for tools to use to improve communication and to store information that is retained longer term, not just on somebody's email inbox somewhere? And secondly, I guess I want to get a clarification on the number of board members there are now. Thank you.
There are currently 9 members of the board. We started out with 12 and had some people resign. During the course of, as those resignations came in, we were having the conversations that Mindy talked about. And so when it was in between times, the board could decide whether or not to replace those folks. And so we replaced to get to 9. And so we've been operating that way for the year, maybe a little longer. Yes. Yes, and so the mechanism for that is that the board, and in the bylaws it says that the trustees will elect somebody, and so the trustees elected Sarana Weller-Fills to fill that position.
And just for people's knowledge, just because there's really 10, we went down to 9, and now Ryan is ex officio, so
Okay.
there's a 10th non-voting board member. So we were 9 for a time, and now we're 1 ex officio plus 9.
But by that thinking, we would have 13 board members, right?
If we had 12.
Right,
There was an
yeah.
ex officio person that wasn't
Right,
before.
yeah.
So I want to get to Bill's tech question, and Mindy's going to be able to chime in here also. So as Bill is sort of nicely referencing, right now we have our various storages that are in electronic mode in a lot of different places. Bill is on a tech team that has a recommendation that we'll be meeting with them pretty early in February. We haven't picked the exact date yet, to bring all of that to one place so that it's like, oh man, was that on Bill's computer or was that up in the cloud? So that's our goal. And Mindy, I think you did some research on it.
Yeah, so when I spoke to the 2 congregations that had made the switch, they both recommended a program called Basecamp. Are you familiar with that, Bill? You back there? There you are. My understanding of it is I did some research on it, but because we weren't moving forward at that moment in time, I apologize if I'm a little bit fuzzy on it. But it's a program that allows communications to be much more easily aggregated in strings, and so you don't have to worry about, well, did everybody get copied on this, or did only a couple of people get copied on this? And so the historical record is a little bit clearer, and also there can be project or topics that are maintained that people can go in asynchronously and add their, board members can go in and add their thoughts and comments. And both of those congregations said that having a tool like that was critical to making the smaller number work very well. So I think it is something that will have to be looked at once the decision is made.
Speaking with my archives hat on, we've been tossing and turning about how do we keep these electronic records from the office, and we don't have a solution to that, and it sounds like this will help us with that solution so that years from now somebody can look up what happened or get resources from that.
I brought show and tell. This is the 1989 directory of church members with photographs. Many of you are in here, if you can look for your picture. This I recommend as a very handy tool for the congregation. It has name and address, and phone number. We could add email address. People who chose to be in it are in it. And it was told, everybody was told, it's for church business only. You cannot go as your Amway sales into this book. And I think we should reinstate something like this, and people can opt out, just as they could opt out of a email list or something like that. But I do think it's a useful community building tool. The other thing I want to say is I was moderator of this board in the 80s, and I feel very strongly in the old structure of a large congregation having a board of trustees with 12 members and standing committees to the board. In answer to your question, the standing committees could discuss the color of the paint in this room, which they did, or the carpeting, and people who had a very strong opinion and wanted purple could come to the standing committee and hash it out. A lot of stuff didn't reach the board, a lot of it did. And sometimes the committee would approve something, it would happen, and the board would go, oh wait, this is not what we want, amongst the broader community. But I feel the more people involved in a large church, the better opportunity for communication, for thinking it through, for involving in friendships and whatever else. I strongly object to the idea of shrinking down to 9 and having the board as just policy only. I also feel that we had a music committee, we had RE committees, and some of those issues about, I don't like that turquoise hymnal and I don't like those songs, could be hashed out in committee, and they could say, okay, once a month, we'll have 4 of these and 3 of those. It works. Anyway, enough out of me. Thank you.
I just want to say we have till 1:30, so I see a lot of hands and a lot of questions, so hopefully everybody gets a chance. I'm going to hand it over to Sophia, who's been waiting patiently.
Just very briefly, going back to the second proposal and the definition of membership, does it not include the requirement to be a pledging member? Or is that not a...
The bylaws are enhanced by the governing policies. I think the bylaws, if I'm not mistaken, in either in that provision or elsewhere, say that the board will develop a policy on membership status, and our governing policies do talk about making a contribution, a pledge that's within the means, that's generous within the means of the member and so forth, so that is a requirement.
First, thank you all for all the work you do on the board and all the committee members. I appreciate that the board is attempting to involve more congregants through committee work, and I appreciate your comment about building community in any way we can. There was one subcommittee that was shown but wasn't described, and I think it was called Board Liberalization. Is that correct?
That's called Board Liberation
Liberation,
Team.
right. I got liberal and liberation. I think we're already liberal pretty well. So I'd be interested in knowing more about what that committee does. Is this to bring more liberty for the board to work, or is there a way for us to support the board? And I think we should have a second committee called the Congregant Liberation, and I direct this to Roger. It's something he and I have talked about, and I think we would be released from trying to figure out our budget in one year and our church budget in another year. I'd like to know if we're even moving towards that, because I think it would be easier for the congregant to understand budgeting if those were in sync. So thank you.
Okay, I heard 2 questions in there, and I'll answer the one about Board Liberation Team. The Board Liberation Team is not a standing committee of the board, but it's sort of a working group of the board. And the way that I see its work currently is to see how is the board living out the 8th principle. right? So how are we making sure we're including all of the voices within the board? How are we looking at the work of the board within the congregation? It's also a place for building really strong bonds around those questions. You can hear that my voice kind of comes and goes. So I've had an issue of inclusion because sometimes I can't be heard. And so the board liberation team is a place where I can go and talk about, well, what am I going to do about that, right? There's been a history in our board before I got on there of maybe devaluing the voices of women or people who present as women. And so the board liberation team was a way to come up with, well, what are we going to do about that? And so changing the way that we hear input and the way that we talk to each other and really confronting those things. So that to me is some of the work on the board liberation team. Or the BLT. I have never eaten a BLT during a BLT meeting, but I feel like that's a missed opportunity. Anybody else want to talk about BLT? Okay, and the second question that you had was about, I'm going to put words in your mouth, but I think that it was about aligning the budget calendar with the annual fund drive calendar. Is that what your question was? No? Okay. Do you know what his question was? Can you talk to you? Oh.
Let me give it a shot.
2 for 2.
I believe, Rick, you and I were talking about putting the fiscal year and the calendar year to match. So it's not the calendar year is from January to December and the fiscal year is from July to June, and to match those up to make things easier. We have been talking about that in the Finance Committee. There is a task force created on paper. We're dealing with other more immediate issues, but we're going to start working on that later on.
Can I just jump in, because one thing that got said, there are board standing committees, 4 of them, and then there are also ministry-focused committees. So I wanted to be sure people know, Carol lifted up, there is still actually a religious education committee, a learning community committee, and I know that Leah Ongiri would love to know if folks wanted to volunteer on that, and we're looking at maybe a curriculum committee. And right now, what doesn't exist is an adult learning committee, but we're talking about relaunching that. So if you're interested in that, I didn't want people to leave not knowing that. And we do have a music transition team that imagines birthing another music committee on the other side. So if you're upset about any color book that songs come out of right now, Theo Harper is chair of that committee. But I wanted you to know, or I mean, that wasn't, but don't tell me, I mean. But so we do have standing committees, we do have ministry committees, we do welcome your thoughts about those.
Yeah, I'd like to address the proposed amendment regarding access to membership lists or membership information. I guess my question is whether the board has considered alternatives to a complete prohibition. I mean, the legislation, the statute, allows the board to limit access, and because our congregation is based upon democratic principles, I think prohibiting access to the membership list is anti-democratic. I mean, we have provisions for people to petition to be candidates for the board. If you can't reach out to congregants to request that they support your petition, which requires 5% of membership, it's much more difficult for congregants to do that. I'd like to see the board consider options such as, letting people opt out of release of their membership information. But personally, I would feel as though my rights were being denied if the board prohibits members from reaching me in regard to issues or their request for candidacy or whatever. So I'd encourage the board to think about ways that they could limit access, limiting it to official church business. I mean, obviously none of us want our information turned over to advertisers or marketers, but limiting it to church business and allowing people to permit the release of their information if they wish.
I just follow up on that. The language I put up there was truly just a suggested change. The board has to decide on the final, and I think input like that would be worth having. And also the law as it's written says, I didn't include all of the different intertwining statutes, but it does say that if someone asks for it, they're entitled to it, but they have to use it for the purposes they've stated they're going to, they have asked it for, and there's certain limitations on what someone can use it for. So not for selling things, not for, you know, it's already limited in the statute. So there is considerations built into it to begin with.
Hi, again, thanks for your service, all of you who are managing this meeting. Brief question about budget. Will there be opportunities before the budget is approved for us to ask specific questions about line items? For example, banking is $19,000, and I'm like, whoa, what's that all about? So will there be opportunities for us to dig a little bit more deeply into the budget before it's approved?
Yes. One of the first meetings, we will hold a congregational meeting. The Finance Committee will hold a congregational meeting in March to answer some of those questions. So, yes.
Hi. I have an opinion on both issues, but on the for the mailing list, membership list, which is probably two different things. I assume there's people on the mailing list who are not actually members. One way to handle it is if, say, another organization has information that they feel that our membership should have, and they want to send it out, whatever, their article, their letter, their thesis to our membership, so they can present the written material to the board and the executive committee, and if the church chooses, says yes, this, you know, I mean, the church affiliates with other groups all the time, you know, witness the collection plate going out. But then the church decides, okay, yes, we agree, this is information that should go to our people. And so the church uses their mailing list and sends it out. They do not ever release the membership list to anyone, because once you give them your mailing list, they own it. They can use it for any purpose they wish in the future. They do not have to get the church's permission to send out anything in the future. You have no control over it. They can use it as many times as they want for as many purposes they want. Whereas if the church sends it out to the membership without releasing the list, then the church has a say in it. Other thing is the number of board members. I've seen organizations where people felt they had the huge board and ended up with some committees of one. People felt they had to, only board members could do the work or could participate, that if they weren't a board member, they didn't contribute. And we need to make sure people understand that there's many ways to contribute aside from being a board member, you know, and there are lots of committees and lots of ways to put in input, and that big board can be very unwieldy. Thank you.
A very quick question on income. Are we going to be having a church auction this year?
Yes.
It's my turn.
What? Sorry? I want to elaborate on that a little bit. once again, we're very blessed to have Sherry and Evie starting to work on the auction this year. Thank you, both of them.
My goodness. Okay, since the auction came up, I want you to know something incredible. So Sharon and Evie and Bill are going to be involved in leading the auction again. And last year, the auction hit the highest number ever, just over $60,000, and is one of the reasons that that we're able to do many of the things we're able to do this year. So it's the last 2 Sundays in April and the first Sunday in May, and you'll be hearing more very soon. But thank you to everyone who's donated, led, participated, or even just attended one of our auction events. So yes, there will be.
I have a question about the budget. I believe Roger said there will be a meeting, a congregational meeting to explain that. Every year I struggle with approving the budget because I do not have a complete set of financials. For years there has been no balance sheet, and as an accountant I can't make sense of an income statement only in making budget decisions. Years ago we had an annual report that told what all the different departments and committees were doing and what they spent, and I wonder if there's any consideration of making that kind of information annual report once again available.
Thank you, Ruth. Yes, we have those reports. The Finance Committee gets them every month, and it has the detail that you're describing, and we will make sure that that will be available to congregants prior to the meeting.
I feel like there were more hands earlier.
I appreciate the news that there are committees, and I didn't know. I could tell Theo that it's not the color of the book, but the songs in it. But that's my point. I think when there's standing committees that are known and they're in the bylaws and they're part of the board, I mean, the part of our structure, people who have a complaint, an interest, wish to be involved will know where to go. And I'm not sure how we select, you know, these committees that we have now that you tell me about. I don't know who those people are or how they were selected or anything about it. So that's.
Any other questions? We've still got a little time left. I think people are getting a little weary. Okay, we've got one more.
Well, I really appreciated the last question. Maybe could there be some answer to that about how the committees are formed, what the committees are, how we would get in touch with them? That's a great community building issue, I think.
One thing I'll say is thank you for giving that feedback, Carol. And what we'll do is, I mean, Catherine and I can talk about this next week, and sometimes John Rosette, who works in the front office, will publish all of the current committees and who is the lead and how to get in touch with them, so it feels like it's time again. And we could even publish more information. So let me chew on that, and I'd love to connect with you and others interested in that after. So.
Great, Alison. Could you also add, you know, a sentence or two of what each committee does and what their responsibility is? That would be very useful. Yeah, thank you.
I think that last question was really important. We used to have an annual report that had feedback from all these committees, not just the board committees, but the church committees. And so I'm going to be an advocate for that returning. And of course, the board will have to help with that, but it's important. What?
That's on the agenda for our next board.
Yeah, and it's on the agenda for the next board meeting. So I wanted to draw us to a close, and thank you so much for being here and giving your questions and listening to our reports. And of course, we're going to do this again, and I invite you to come to the next one. Your ministers and your lay leaders are working with you to strengthen all parts of this community. So let us build a thriving, justice-seeking place. May we continue to provide a welcoming, safe, and loving Unitarian Universalist home here. And thank you again, and enjoy your afternoon.